Welcome to Chronicles Confidential, where silence is never what it seems, and even the calmest nights hide the darkest secrets. It began with a whisper, a single, trembling phone call in the middle of the night. The voice on the other end was barely audible, shaky, uncertain. At first, it seemed like nothing, just another false alarm, just another scared soul with shadows in their mind. But what followed shook the very core of the investigation team. This is a story of a man who wore a mask of normalcy, who blended into the crowd, smiled at neighbors, waved politely to the mailman, while hiding something monstrous beneath. He didn't leave bloodstains or fingerprints. He left out. He left questions. He left silence. And yet, the police didn't give up. Using sharp instincts, subtle observations, and an unbreakable chain of quiet intelligence, they unraveled the mystery thread by thread. What began as a vague report turned into a chilling manhunt. What seemed like nothing became everything. In this episode, you'll witness how a handful of overlooked details, an odd glance, a misplaced item, a hesitant answer, became the breadcrumbs that led officers straight to a predator hiding in plain sight. At Chronicles Confidential, we don't just tell stories about crime. We dig into the psychology behind them. We expose the minds that manipulate, the tactics that deceive, and the courage it takes to confront evil in its quietest form. This is not just a case. This is a revelation. And it starts now. It was 2:47 a.m. when the emergency dispatch line rang. The operator, half awake but trained to urgency, picked up with routine calm. 911. What's your emergency? There was a pause, long enough to trigger a flicker of concern. Then a voice, barely a whisper. Female, young. I think someone's watching me. The operator straightened. Can you tell me your name? But the girl didn't answer that. Her breathing was shallow, fast, almost rhythmic in panic. You could hear the fear in the silence between her words. I don't see anyone, but I know he's there. I just feel it. The dispatcher signaled for a trace while gently trying to keep her talking. Where are you right now? Are you inside your home? I locked all the doors. I closed every window. But I think he's still out there, watching. A beat passed. Then she whispered again, lower this time. He was in the hallway yesterday. I heard footsteps. I thought it was the neighbors. But then something changed. By now, protocol dictated an officer be sent for a wellness check. It seemed like a case of anxiety, maybe paranoia, maybe trauma. Calls like these weren't uncommon. But something in her tone, something in the rhythm of her words made the dispatcher hesitate. It wasn't hysteria. It was calculation, as if she was trying not to be heard by someone who might be listening. She didn't hang up. Instead, the line stayed live, and the dispatcher listened to silence, long, creeping silence. Then faint creaking, a floorboard, a door hinge. The girl's voice returned, this time barely audible. He's inside. That's when the line cut off. For a moment, everything stopped. The operator stared at the console. No location, no name, no number, just silence. But they couldn't ignore what they heard. An emergency alert was issued. Nearby patrol units were notified, and within minutes, officers were dispatched to the triangulated area, just a rough radius based on tower pings. They started knocking on doors, apartment by apartment, room by room. At first, nothing. No girl. No sign of struggle. No broken locks. No witness. Until one of the officers noticed a flickering hallway light on the second floor of a dilapidated building, and a single, damp footprint. What seemed like a routine mental health call was no longer just a precaution. The girl hadn't imagined it. She was real, and she was in real danger. But the more they searched, the more they realized this wasn't a random stalker. It was the start of something calculated. Someone had planned this, and that girl may have been just the beginning. The building was silent when Officer Malik stepped inside. No signs of forced entry. No broken windows. No overturned furniture. Just silence, and the faint, lingering scent of old wood, and something colder, something metallic. He moved slowly to the narrow hallway, flashlight in hand. sweeping across the faded wallpaper and dim corridor lights. Each door looked the same, closed, undisturbed, the kind of normalcy that tries a little too hard to convince you everything is fine. But Malik had seen too many crime scenes to believe in perfect silence. The call that brought him here was vague, an incomplete trace, a dropped call, no confirmed location. But that voice, the fear in it, it wasn't fake. He knew panic. He knew manipulation. And he knew when someone was truly afraid. Room 204 caught his attention. Not because of noise, not because of damage, but because the door was unlocked, just barely ajar. Not wide open, not broken in, just left, waiting. He nudged it open. Inside, the room was tidy. Spotless. Too spotless. The bed was made. The floor vacuumed. A single chair stood near the window, facing outward. Curtains drawn, yet just slightly apart, as if someone had been watching through them or waiting for someone on the other side. He scanned the room carefully. No blood. No signs of struggle. No handwritten notes. Nothing obvious. And yet, a chill ran down his spine. He walked over to the table and noticed something small, almost invisible. A coffee mug. Empty. Clean. But the ring left behind on the coaster was still wet. Recent. Someone had been here. Malik crouched, examining the floor. No scuff marks. But one strand of long, brown hair lay near the baseboard. A single thread, almost like it had been left behind on purpose. He stood up, eyes narrowing. His instincts, those quiet alarms built over years of investigating, were screaming now. There was no crime scene here, but that didn't mean no crime had occurred. Sometimes, the most dangerous moments happen in silence, when no one screams, when nothing breaks, when someone wants it to look like nothing happened at all. And Malik knew that kind of quiet is never innocent. 2 days had passed since the initial call, and the trail had started to grow cold. No new sightings. No confirmed identity of the missing girl. The neighbors were unhelpful. Most claimed they heard nothing, saw nothing. The building's management had no tenant by the name linked to the number. It was as if she had never existed. Officer Malik wasn't ready to give up. Back at the station, he requested access to archive reports of similar calls from the past year within the same district. Mostly ignored files, dismissed as hoaxes or unresolved disappearances. He stayed long into the night, poring over paper after paper, until something unusual caught his eye. A 5-month-old missing persons report, filed by a school counselor. A student, female, 19 years old, had stopped attending classes abruptly. No official withdrawal. No goodbye. Just gone. Attached to the file was a single scanned page from a diary found in the student's locker. The counselor had turned it in, unsure if it meant anything. It was never followed up. Just another case shelved away. The page was barely legible, scribbled in rushed handwriting. But certain lines stood out. He said no one would believe me. I hear his keys in the door when I'm supposed to be alone. If I disappear, it wasn't an accident. Malik's heart pounded as he read the final line. He watches from the chair, always from the chair. The chair, the same exact placement as the one in room 204, facing the window. Still, waiting. This wasn't coincidence. This wasn't imagination. He scanned the name, Amina Khurshid. She had lived 2 blocks from the building. No family reported her missing. No one followed up. Malik pulled every shred of information he could. Yearbook photos, school files, social media accounts. Most were inactive, but in an old tag photo, he saw her face. And behind her, in the background, that same apartment complex. Blurred, distant, but unmistakable. Amina had been there. And now, with a diary page in hand, Malik knew they hadn't just lost track of a frightened girl. They had missed a warning. One written in fear and never heard in time. That lost note wasn't just a memory. It was a map, and someone had deliberately made sure it got buried. With the diary page in hand and the name Amina Khurshid now central to the investigation, Officer Malik made a decision. One that would change the direction of the case entirely. The problem wasn't lack of evidence. It was that the evidence was deliberately hidden, covered, erased, Whoever was behind this, they were meticulous. But Malik knew that no one, no matter how careful, could hide from their own behavior. So the police shifted gears. They didn't storm the building. They didn't alert the media. Instead, they started watching. Quietly, plainclothes officers were placed at strategic points, inside parked vehicles, disguised as maintenance workers, and even renting 2 units within the same complex. Small cameras were installed in hallways under the guise of building security upgrades. The entryways, back doors, and garbage chutes were monitored. No one in or out without being seen. Days passed. Routine became data. Patterns started forming. Most tenants came and went with the usual rhythm of life: work, errands, visitors. But one man stood out. Unit 208. He left at odd hours. Never spoke to anyone. Didn't make eye contact. No deliveries. No guests. He carried the same plain black backpack every time he exited the building. And every evening, just before sunset, he'd return, like clockwork, and sit by the window, not watching television, not reading, just sitting, perfectly still, for hours. To the casual eye, it meant nothing. But Malik knew better. They pulled the building's old rental records. The tenant of Unit 208 didn't exist in the current database. It was listed as vacant. Yet, someone was living there. A camera placed discreetly above the hallway caught him pausing outside room 204. He never entered, just stood there, sometimes for 30 seconds, sometimes longer, his head slightly tilted, as if listening for something. One night, he reached out and touched the door handle, then pulled his hand back. It was subtle, almost meaningless. But to trained eyes, it revealed something deeper: hesitation, obsession, control. He wasn't random. He wasn't opportunistic. He had a history with that room. And maybe with Amina, the surveillance wasn't just gathering movement anymore. It was building a psychological profile. Every movement, every hesitation, every repetition was a glimpse into the mind of a man trying very hard not to be noticed. But the harder he tried to stay invisible, the clearer he became. By day, he was the kind of man no one questioned. He wore iron shirts, nodded politely to neighbors, held the elevator door open for strangers. He worked a quiet job at a print shop 2 miles away, always on time, never late. He paid in cash, tipped in exact change, and smiled just enough to be forgettable. To the world, he was harmless, invisible, just another quiet man living alone. But when the sun went down, something changed. The cameras captured his nightly transformation. After returning home around 7:30 p.m., he would remain inside until just past midnight. Then, without fail, he'd leave, always wearing the same dark hoodie, the same black backpack, and a face that no longer smiled. At night, he didn't nod to anyone. He didn't wait for elevators. He moved quickly, with purpose, through alleyways, along fences, using side streets as if following a route he had memorized long ago. He wasn't out for walks. He wasn't meeting friends. He was watching, not one specific building, but several, taking turns, spending 15 to 20 minutes outside each, then vanishing. One night, an undercover officer followed him. The suspect never made direct contact with anyone, but he paused in front of a window on the 3rd floor of another apartment complex. He stood completely still for 13 minutes, just staring. It was a child's room. He didn't try to break in. He didn't move toward the door. He just watched. Then he turned around and walked away, disappearing into shadows behind the dumpsters. Back at his apartment, the investigators noticed something else: the blacked-out windows, the taped-over peephole, the absence of mirrors. Everything inside Unit 208 was positioned to block visibility in or out. It wasn't paranoia. It was control. This was a man who split himself in two. By day, he was a neighbor you never looked at twice. By night, he was a hunter who memorized your routine. He didn't want chaos. He wanted power without detection. But now, the mask was beginning to slip, and the man who had spent years blending in was about to be seen for who he really was. It was time to bring him in. Not under arrest, yet, There wasn't enough. But they had just enough suspicion, just enough behavioral evidence, to justify a formal interview. It would be casual, voluntary, a routine follow-up. He didn't hesitate. He showed up wearing the same iron shirt, the same mild expression. Calm, cooperative, almost too cooperative. Detective Rana led the questioning. She had a reputation for unraveling lies, not through pressure, but through patience. Her method was simple: let the suspect speak, then ask him to repeat himself. And that's when the cracks began to show. He was asked about his address. Unit 208. I've lived there for about 5 months. 5 minutes later, when asked how long he'd known the building manager, he replied, ever since I moved in about 7 months ago. Detective Rana didn't flinch, just nodded and moved on. She asked where he worked. The print shop on Harrison Avenue. Later, she casually inquired about where he was the night of the missing girl's call. He paused and said, I was at home. I worked late that day. But earlier you said you leave work at 5 every day. Another pause, just a second too long. Oh, right. I mean, I stayed up working on something at home. Not wrong, not suspicious on its own, but inconsistent. And that's what they were counting on. Then came the photos. An old group photo from a school event. Amina Khurshid, smiling, surrounded by classmates. And behind her, barely visible in the shadows, him. He didn't notice the photo at first. But when she slid across the table, his eyes locked onto it. You know her? Rana asked. He blinked. No. Should I? She filed a report at your building's address 5 months ago. That's not possible. I didn't live there then. You said you moved in 7 months ago. Silence. He leaned back in the chair, arms crossed now. Must be a mistake. Rana smiled slightly. Funny thing about mistakes. They stack up. From that point on, every answer was slower, hesitant, as if he was recalibrating his story with every breath. But it was too late. They weren't looking for a confession. They were looking for fractures. And he was giving them all the cracks they needed. By the end of the interview, he had contradicted himself in 17 different ways. Timeline inconsistencies, relationship denials, address confusion, unexplained gaps in routine. And though he walked out of that room a free man, he didn't realize he had already walked straight into their trap. The web of lies he thought he had spun so carefully was now the very net pulling him down. It was small, almost invisible. During a second, more detailed sweep of room 204, the same room where the missing girl had last been heard, the forensic team discovered something wedged between the floorboards near the window. It was a simple silver pen, no more than an inch long, shaped like a crescent moon, the kind you'd find on a backpack strap or jacket collar. Not expensive, not rare, but out of place. The room had been spotless. Every object cleaned, every surface wiped. The forensics team initially thought it belonged to one of their own, accidentally dropped during the earlier investigation. But when they checked, no one claimed it. That made it evidence. And in cases like this, even the smallest object mattered. The team photographed it, logged it, and ran it through the system. No immediate matches. But Malik wasn't satisfied. He had noticed something strange about the man from Unit 208. In one of the security camera stills taken 2 weeks earlier, the suspect was wearing a dark backpack, and attached to the left strap, almost blurred into the image, was a silver shape. Malik zoomed in. The resolution was poor, but the shape was unmistakable. The same crescent moon. He pulled up the footage from later that week. In that image, the pin was gone. The backpack strap was bare. That meant it had fallen off somewhere, and the only place they had searched was room 204. Suddenly, the timeline clicked. The suspect had visited that room again. Quietly, illegally, recently. That pin wasn't just an accessory. It was proof of presence. Proof he had returned to the scene after the initial investigation. Likely to clean, to erase, to remove anything left behind. And in that act of obsessive control, he made a mistake. The forensics team took the pin to the lab. Under microscopic analysis, they found traces of synthetic fibers and a faint smear of oil consistent with high-end boot polish. The same brand found near the doorway of Unit 208. They now had 3 connections: the pen, the backpack, and the fibers, all unique, all pointing to the same man. It wasn't the knife. It wasn't blood. It was something everyone else had missed. A single, shiny crescent. That cracked open the identity of a man who had built his life on being invisible. For weeks, no one in the building said a word. The residents kept their doors shut and their conversations brief. They had lived beside the man in Unit 208 for years, and yet, when questioned, most responded the same way. He kept to himself, seemed quiet, never caused trouble. It was the kind of silence that protects monsters. But silence doesn't last forever. One morning, as officers reviewed surveillance logs in the building's maintenance room, an older tenant approached them. Her name was Mrs. Shaheen, widowed, lived alone in Unit 210, 2 doors down from the suspect. She wore a thick shawl and walked with cane, but her eyes were sharp, and her voice carried the weight of someone who had been holding back for too long. "I need to speak with someone," she said softly. She was led into a private room. A recorder was turned on, and then, for the first time in years, the truth began to surface. "I used to hear things," she began. "Late at night, not all the time. Just now and then, a muffled voice, a girl's voice, crying, maybe not screaming, just soft, like someone trying not to be heard." The officers leaned in. At first, I thought it was a TV, but it kept happening. Always after midnight. Always for just a few minutes. Then silence. Total silence. She paused. Took a breath. One night, I went and knocked on his door. I didn't plan to. My hands just moved. But before I got there, I heard footsteps inside. Heavy. Slow. They stopped right at the door. Like he knew I was there. Like he was listening too. And I turned around. I went back. "Why didn't you report it?" asked the officer gently. She looked down, ashamed. "Because I was afraid. He always watched me. Not directly. But I'd feel it, like he was waiting for me to say something." Then she added something else. "I once saw him carrying something wrapped in plastic. Long. He was dragging it, carefully, like he didn't want to leave marks. It was raining. The hallway was dark. And when he saw me, he smiled. Not like a neighbor. Like someone who knew I wouldn't do anything." Her statement shifted the investigation. It confirmed what the evidence only hinted at. He wasn't just stalking. He was acting, and he had done it before. Mrs. Shaheen's testimony became the missing voice, the one that had remained silent for too long, the one that proved someone had known something was wrong. It reminded everyone involved. Sometimes evil survives not because it's invisible, but because it's ignored. And all it takes is one voice to shatter the silence. After the neighbor's chilling testimony, the case took on new urgency. Detective Rana knew this wasn't the suspect's first crime. His behavior, the calculated silence, the obsessive control, the eerie patience, was too refined. This wasn't a man improvising. This was a man repeating. She ordered a deep dive into cold case files in the past 10 years, focusing on any reports of missing young women, anonymous emergency calls, and unresolved disturbances within a 10-mile radius of the suspect's current and previous residences. It didn't take long. The first file came from 8 years ago. A 19-year-old student reported missing. Last seen leaving her college campus around 7:15 p.m. Her final known location? A bus stop 3 blocks from an apartment building, where the suspect once rented a basement room. The case was never solved. No leads. No suspects. Just silence. The second file was older, 10 years back. A call from a teenage girl, never traced. The content of the call was almost identical to one they had received weeks ago. "I think someone's watching me. He waits until it's dark. He said I couldn't leave." That file had been closed within 48 hours due to lack of evidence. There were more. 6 unsolved cases, spread across a decade, different neighborhoods, different names, but all had 2 things in common: a young woman and a suspect who was never found. Rana cross-referenced addresses, work records, and lease documents. In 3 of those cases, The suspect had been living or working within walking distance of the victims. His name had never appeared in the original reports, because he had always kept his profile just low enough to stay invisible. But not anymore. His pattern was clear now. He didn't kidnap in broad daylight. He didn't break down doors. He waited. He followed. He chose his victims carefully, those who felt unsafe but had no proof to show. And each time, the story ended the same. No evidence. No witness. No body. Until now. The current investigation had something none of the past ones did. Surveillance, a witness, a physical object linking him to the scene, and a team that refused to be distracted by how normal he looked. Those old case files weren't just history. They were a blueprint, a timeline of horror hidden in plain sight. And as the pages turned, the truth became undeniable. This wasn't a new predator. This was a season 1. A ghost walking through the cracks in the system. Until now. The footage came from a hallway camera the police had installed just 2 weeks earlier, hidden inside a fire alarm casing directly across from room 204. For days, it had captured routine movement. Residents coming and going. Deliveries. Repairs. Nothing unusual. But on the night following the girl's phone call, the very night her voice had vanished into silence, the camera recorded something else. At 2:56 a.m., the hallway was still. Then movement. The man from Unit 208 stepped into frame. He wasn't dressed like a man taking out the trash or checking the mail. He wore gloves. No shoes. No phone. Just the same dark hoodie, the same blank expression, and that same black backpack, slung tightly across his shoulder. He moved slowly toward room 204. The footage showed him pausing at the door, just like the neighbor described. He stood there for nearly 40 seconds. Still, listening. Then, without hesitation, he reached into his pocket, pulled out a key, and unlocked the door. Not forced entry. Not a break-in. A key. He slipped inside and closed the door behind him. The timestamp showed he remained inside for 27 minutes. Then, at 3:23 a.m., he re-emerged. His backpack now looked heavier, bulging. He glanced once down the hall, once at the stairwell camera, and then walked out of frame. He didn't return for the rest of the night. The footage confirmed everything the investigators had suspected, but never expected to see so clearly. He hadn't just been stalking. He hadn't just been watching. He had access to the apartment, to the girl, to the crime. There was no longer a question of whether something had happened. Now the question was far more chilling. What had he taken with him in that backpack? The camera didn't show the act itself, but it showed the truth. A man who had built his life on silence had finally been seen, and the one witness he couldn't outsmart was the unblinking eye of the camera. Detective Rana knew that brute force wouldn't crack him. He was too careful, too methodical. He spoke in measured tones, never raised his voice, never got flustered. Denials came easily to him, wrapped in politeness and feigned confusion. He had rehearsed this, probably for years. But there's one thing even the most controlled mind struggles with: itself. So she changed the strategy. No more direct accusations. No more timelines. She decided to play his game, only better. The next interrogation began with silence. No questions. Just quiet, long enough to make him shift in his seat. Finally, she slid a photograph across the table. It wasn't the crime scene. It wasn't even of Amina. It was of a window. Room 204's window, taken from across the street at night. The chair was visible in the frame. She leaned forward. Do you think people leave chairs like that on purpose? Facing the window? He looked confused, then smiled faintly. I wouldn't know. She didn't react, just nodded. What do you see when you sit still in silence for hours? She asked casually. He blinked. Depends on what you're looking for. No, it depends on what you're hiding from, she replied. And just like that, the shift began. For the next hour, she never accused him of anything. Instead, she spoke of patterns, of impulses, of people who watch others to feel powerful. She told stories of past criminals, some real, some fictional, men who never hurt anyone physically, but still destroyed lives. Every detail was tailored to mirror him. Every word a reflection. He stayed quiet at first. Then he started correcting her. No, that kind of person would have left more signs. Someone who watches doesn't always want to act. Sometimes it's about control, not violence. Each correction was a confession in disguise. She never wrote anything down, but slowly he began to unravel. His posture stiffened. His tone shifted from calm to defensive. He began stumbling over his own explanations. At one point, she mentioned the missing backpack. I'm sure you still have it somewhere. Men like that, they never really throw things away. They just move them. He snapped back too quickly. I got rid of that months ago. She paused. He froze. The trap had worked, because she had never said when the backpack went missing. And now, he had confirmed he'd had it. He realized it too, the moment the words left his mouth. His eyes darted to the corner of the room, lips tightening. That single slip, so minor, so fast, told her everything she needed. He wasn't just caught. He was unraveling. Psychological pressure isn't always loud. Sometimes it's the quiet unraveling of certainty, the slow collapse of a perfectly built lie. And in that room, under a single flickering light, the mask finally began to crack. They had enough to suspect him, enough to follow him, enough to watch his every move, but not enough to arrest. And that's where the trap began. Detective Rana and Officer Malik devised a strategy, not to confront him, but to lure him, to make him believe the danger had passed, that he was still in control, that no one was watching anymore. They started by scaling back the visible surveillance. No more marked patrols near the building. No more late-night questioning of residents. The cameras remained, but hidden better. Officers rotated in and out in plainclothes, blending with local delivery services and street vendors. Every exit, every alley, every window line was watched. Then they made their move. They planted a new resident in room 204, a young female officer, trained in undercover work. She moved in quietly, no fanfare. Lights on at normal hours. Curtains left slightly open. The chair by the window placed exactly as before. The entire apartment was wired. Microphones in the walls. Pressure sensors near the door. Motion detectors along the hallway. Nothing would go unnoticed. They waited. The first night passed in silence. The second, he watched, caught on camera, lingering in the hallway just past midnight. He didn't approach the door, just stood there, hands in pockets, like he was listening. By the fifth night, he returned with the backpack. He knelt outside the door for a moment. Gloved hands reached under the doormat. He didn't find a key, but he did try the handle. It was locked. Inside, the undercover officer sat motionless, her heartbeat steady in her earpiece. The control team listened in complete silence. Then came the moment they had prepared for. He pulled something from his jacket, a thin tool, a lockpick. He began working quickly, confidently. But the door was rigged. The moment he inserted the tool, a silent alarm was triggered. Cameras went live. Officers swarmed into position. Before he even turned the handle, the hallway light snapped on, blinding white. He froze. Behind him, a voice rang out. Hands where we can see them. He turned slowly, blinking into the light. His face was blank, expressionless, as if this was all some misunderstanding. But he didn't speak. He didn't run, because deep down he knew he had walked into the illusion of safety. The hunter had just become the prey, and everything he thought he controlled had already been turned against him. Once he was in custody, he refused to speak. No confession, no emotion, no acknowledgement of guilt. But what he didn't realize, what so many like him still fail to understand, is that silence means nothing in the digital age. You don't need words when your data is already speaking for you. His phone had been seized the night of the trap, locked, encrypted. He thought he was safe behind passwords and factory resets. But the forensic team wasn't looking for texts or photos. They were looking for patterns, for shadows. First came a location history. Even though the GPS had been disabled, the phone had quietly been tracking movements through app activity Wi-Fi signals, and cache routes. It showed late-night movements to 3 different neighborhoods, each of which matched the unsolved missing persons cases the detectives had reviewed earlier. One address stood out: an abandoned warehouse listed in a 10-year-old cold case. The suspect had no known connection to it, but he had visited the area 4 times in the past 6 months, always after midnight, always alone. Then came the deleted files. Deep within the phone's storage, recovery software unearthed fragments of audio recordings, badly damaged partial clips. But one of them was enough. A girl's voice, shaky, frightened. "I don't know where I am." He said, "I can't leave. Please." The clip cut off. It wasn't dated, but forensic metadata placed its creation within the last 7 weeks, the same night Amina disappeared. They traced app usage logs. He had used a file transfer tool to move folders to an external drive. The drive hadn't been found yet, but the fingerprints of those transfers, the timestamps, the file names, were all there. Even his messaging history, wiped clean, left traces. The team found logs of anonymous accounts tied to private forums where he had discussed surveillance techniques, emotional dominance, and how to erase presence. Each post was laced with arrogance. He thought he was smarter than everyone else. He thought that deleting something made it vanish. But every swipe, every click, every moment of control was logged, mapped, exposed. The same device he used to stalk, to monitor, to manipulate, became the weapon that dismantled his entire facade. Technology didn't just outsmart him, it stripped him bare. Because in a world that never stops recording, there's no such thing as a perfect crime. He sat in the interrogation room for hours, still silent, unmoving. No lawyer, no requests, just long stretches of breathless calm, like a man waiting for the storm to pass. Detective Rana didn't push him. She knew this kind of silence wasn't confidence. It was calculation. The mind of a man who thought he was still in control, who believed that if he said nothing, they had nothing. But control is a fragile illusion, and slowly it began to crumble. First, she laid the photos in front of him, one by one. Amina's face, the hallway footage, the backpack, the silver pen, the map of his movements, the voice recording. He didn't react. Not at first. Then came the message logs, printouts of the dark web forums, the anonymous advice, the posts that mirrored his methods with chilling precision. Still, no words. So she said nothing. She simply played the voice again. That trembling whisper. "Please, I don't know where I am." He blinked, swallowed, looked down, and finally he spoke. I didn't mean for it to go that far. His voice was hoarse, dry, like it hadn't been used in years. She wasn't supposed to fight back. I told her I wouldn't hurt her if she just listened. He looked up, eyes glassy but empty. She looked at me like she understood, like she knew what I needed, but then she tried to leave. Each sentence was a fracture in his mask. Each word peeled back another layer of the monster he had hidden for so long. She said my name. He whispered. I never told her my name. He looked away. I didn't want to do it, but once it started, I couldn't stop. It was like I wasn't there anymore. The room was still, the air thick with the weight of truth. Detective Rana didn't interrupt. She didn't need to, because for the first time, he wasn't hiding behind silence. He wasn't spinning stories. He was just unraveling. Years of darkness, years of careful control, all of it collapsing under the weight of one simple, inescapable truth. He had done it, and now he had said it. The confession wasn't screamed. It wasn't dramatic. It was whispered, like everything else he had done in the shadows. But this time, the silence had finally broken. The courtroom was packed. Journalists filled the back rows. Officers lined the aisles. Families of the missing sat in silence, clutching photographs that had faded with time but not with memory. And at the center of it all, behind the defendant's table, sat the man who had once thrived in the shadows. He no longer looked untouchable. His shirt was wrinkled, his expression blank. The calm had drained from his face, replaced by something unfamiliar: exposure. As the trial began, The prosecution laid out the evidence with surgical precision: the diary page, the surveillance footage, the recovered digital logs, the forensic data, the confession. Every piece fit like a puzzle, building a timeline of horror, manipulation, and cold calculation. Witness after witness took the stand. The neighbor who heard the cries but had been too afraid to speak. The forensic analyst who recovered the deleted files. The undercover officer who sat alone in room 204, waiting for him to return. Each testimony carved deeper into the truth. And then came the families. They spoke not in rage, but in grief. Amina's mother took the stand, her voice trembling, eyes hollow from nights spent hoping for a knock that never came. She wasn't just a missing girl, she said. She was my daughter, my only child. And for 5 years, the world acted like she vanished into smoke. But she didn't vanish. She was taken. By him. The courtroom fell silent. Even the judge paused before speaking again. When it was the defense's turn, they tried to argue mental instability, childhood trauma, social isolation. But no one in that room could ignore the pattern, the methodical repetition, the years of silence, the confidence with which he had moved through the world. This wasn't madness. This was design. And when the verdict came, it arrived with the weight of everything that had been buried for far too long. Guilty, on all counts, multiple life sentences, no possibility of parole. There was no cheering, no celebration, just a long collective exhale. Justice hadn't erased the pain, but it had finally given it a name, a face, a reckoning. Outside the courthouse, Amina's name was spoken aloud for the first time in public. Broadcast on every news channel, written on every headline. She was no longer a file number. She was a story, and her story had been heard. The doors of justice had opened wide, and the silence that once protected a predator had finally turned against him. They had sat through every hearing. His parents, his older brother, a cousin who used to call him a quiet genius. They came in quietly, sat in the second row, and listened day after day as the story unfolded. At first, they believed in his innocence. They defended his silence. They called it a misunderstanding, a conspiracy, a mistake. They told reporters he was shy, misunderstood, maybe depressed, but never dangerous. But belief is fragile when truth comes crashing in. When the confession was played in court, the calm, eerie way he admitted what he had done, their faces changed. His mother's hand slipped from her lap. She didn't cry. She just stared ahead, unmoving, as if her body had disconnected from the moment. His father clenched his fists, his jaw tight with something heavier than rage, shame. And when the prosecutor turned toward them, not to accuse, but to acknowledge the pain they too now carried, there was a pause, a quiet, haunting acknowledgement that the damage didn't end with the victims. It had reached the very roots of the man they thought they knew. His brother was the first to leave the courtroom that day. He stood up in the middle of testimony, his eyes burning with disbelief, not at the prosecution, but at his own memory. The holidays, the shared childhood, the moments that now seem like illusions. Because how do you reconcile years of family dinners, birthdays, and quiet weekends with the knowledge that the person sitting across from you is hiding a monster underneath? They gave no interviews after the trial, no statements, no apologies, because what could they say? They were mourning someone who was still alive, but no longer the person they thought he was. He hadn't just shattered lives outside his home. He had poisoned the very foundation of the people who raised him, who trusted him, who loved him. And now, they too would carry the weight of his truth, not in handcuffs, not in a cell, but in every memory that now felt like a lie. The verdict had been announced, the sentence declared, and the courtroom emptied. But outside, the world had only just begun to react. News of the case spread like wildfire. Headlines screamed the unimaginable truth. Predator lived among us for years, unnoticed. Social media erupted with disbelief, grief, and fury. Hashtags bearing Amina's name trended for days. Her photograph, once buried in a forgotten school file, was now shared across the country, a symbol of all the victims who were never heard in time. People weren't just angry at the man who committed the crimes. They were angry at the silence that allowed him to keep going. Questions echoed across communities. How could no one notice? How did he go unchecked for so long? Why were the early warning signs ignored? How many others are still out there, hiding in plain sight? Town halls were filled with parents demanding stronger protections. Colleges reviewed their student support protocols. Apartment complexes revisited their tenant screening procedures. Nonprofit groups began organizing around the names of the forgotten girls. Support centers reported an increase in anonymous calls, voices trembling just like Amina's had once trembled, finally brave enough to speak because someone else had been heard. And in the middle of this tidal wave of awareness, something remarkable happened. The silence cracked open. People began sharing their own stories. Stories of fear, of being watched, of not being believed. The illusion of safety that had protected predators for decades was beginning to dissolve, replaced with vigilance, conversation, and resolve. The case didn't just expose one man. It exposed a blind spot in society, a dangerous comfort with ignoring the quiet signs, the soft cries, the subtle shifts in behavior that we too often dismiss. For the first time, the public began to truly understand. Not all monsters roar. Some whisper, some smile, some live next door. And when that truth was finally seen, it forced an entire community to open its eyes. Because Amina's story wasn't just hers. It was a mirror held up to a world that had looked away for too long. This case didn't begin with a gunshot. It didn't start with a body. It started with a whisper, a soft, terrified voice in the dark, barely heard and nearly forgotten. There were no dramatic clues, no blood-stained floors, no smoking guns. What broke this case open? What led to justice was something far more powerful: observation, instinct, and relentless patience. The police didn't rush. They didn't force confessions. They listened. They watched. They waited. Every silence was examined. Every inconsistency unraveled. Every small, easily dismissed detail, like a fallen pin or a flicker on a camera feed, was treated like the center of a puzzle. Because in reality, policing isn't always about fast chases or bold raids. Sometimes it's about understanding human behavior, recognizing patterns, feeling when something's off, even when you can't yet explain why. Officer Malik followed his instinct into an empty apartment. Detective Rana unraveled a liar with nothing but calm, targeted questions. A silent surveillance camera stood as the witness no one else could be. An old diary page, long forgotten, became the voice of the victim. Together, these small, quiet tools, intelligence, psychology, and presence, expose a man who had built his life on staying invisible. And that is the real lesson. The badge doesn't just represent authority. It represents responsibility. To see what others overlook. To listen when others dismiss. To stand firm when there's no applause, no spotlight, no certainty, just instinct and truth. This case wasn't solved by luck. It was solved by discipline. By men and women who refused to be fooled by normalcy, who believed that behind even the calmest silence, the scream may be hiding. And because of that belief, a voice was heard, a family found answers, and a predator was finally unmasked. This is what justice looks like. Not loud, not fast, but real, earned, one quiet moment at a time. If this story moved you, if it made you feel, question, or even pause for a moment, don't let it end in silence. Because these stories aren't just about crime. They're about the hidden corners of the human mind, the quiet moments that shape lives, the dangers that wear familiar faces. At Crime Chronicles Confidential, we go beyond the headlines. We dive into the psychology. We tell the stories others forget. We give a voice to those who were silenced. So if you want more than just facts, if you want truth, raw and unfiltered, subscribe to Crime Chronicles Confidential now. Leave a comment below. Tell us what you felt. Tell us what stories need to be told next. And most importantly, share this video. Because you never know who needs to hear it. You never know who's still afraid to speak. And sometimes just one shared story can change everything. We're listening, we're watching, and we're not staying silent.